Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 254. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Amy Weinland Daughters about her book, You Cannot Mess This Up, a true story that never happened. Amy kicked around the idea for a funny little time travel story for a very long time before actually writing it, finishing it, and sending it out into the world. You Cannot Mess This Up is the story of Amy going back in time to her childhood home in 1978 to spend 36 hours with her family over the Thanksgiving holiday. In this story, she meets her 10-year-old self and rediscovers what a wonderful, funny, vibrant person she used to be. By the end of writing this book, Amy wanted to be that 10-year-old self again. Amy describes this story as a memoir wrapped in a tortilla of fictional time travel. In this episode, I'll chat with Amy about her writing journey, how writing this story allowed her to let herself and her family off the hook for a lot of things, and her follow-up book, Dear Dana, which chronicles that time when she sent handwritten letters to her nearly 600 Facebook friends, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Amy Weinland Daughters, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Stacey. I'm excited to be here.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your book, You Cannot Mess This Up, a true story that never happened. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Right, Stacey. Well, this book was an idea that I had kicked around in my head for a long time. And when I really got some traction with my writing, I was a sports writer. I wrote about college football, was really my first real gig. I had an editor who I got on a phone call with, and he was like, you're one of our top writers. I remember thinking, I'm not saying that to blow smoke up my own rear end, but I was like, wait a second, maybe I'm actually because I wasn't trained to be a writer. Maybe this is something I can do. So I was like, I'm going to try to write the book idea that I wanted to write, but I just needed that confidence, that little push over the edge. And he's really the guy, and he doesn't know that, who pushed this whole project into being. Because I had thought forever what I want to do, because I love nostalgia, and I love everything that's, beforehand, I would go back into the past rather than go in the future. I love the Sears catalog. I have a metal detector. I'm obsessed with that kind of thing. eBay. I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write myself back to my own childhood in 1978. And it's going to be this hilarious time travel book. I'm going to travel back. I'm going to I have to go. I'm going to get made. I'm going to be a distant cousin, and I'm going to have a time travel guide and says, you've got to go into your childhood home for 36 hours. And they don't know who you are, but your parents are the same age as you. Your brother and sister are there, and you have to deal with your 10-year-old self, who should probably be on ADHD medicine. And so I was like, this is going to be hilarious. We're all going to be wearing Sears catalog coordinates. There's going to be a lot of smoking, no hand sanitizer. And I just obsessed with the research for this. But then I realized when I holed up in a hotel room with all the family videos and the pictures and tried to mentally get myself there, I was like, wait a second. I am going to have to remember these memories I remembered as an adult. I'm going to see my parents as contemporaries, and I'm going to realize my younger self remembered everything wrong, not because she was flawed, but because she was 10 years old. And so this book turned into my funny little time travel book, turned into a catharsis for me. And for, I think for a lot of readers, and I say that just on the feedback I've gotten, but it turned into this catharsis, this relatable story about what would you do if you were faced with your 10-year-old self, and your parents and your siblings, and no matter what time period you grew up.
Well, let's talk about your 10-year-old self. Let's talk about your main character, because I'm curious. One, is she really you? And were there moments, if she was, if there were there moments where you were tempted to fictionalize her, to make her different or better or stretch her so that she could do something you wanted her to do? How was that? How did you meet maybe that temptation?
Well, that's a great question. And, I've never been asked that question. So it's fascinating. But, the book really is a memoir wrapped in a tortilla of nonfiction because it's time travel. So I was actually, it's like the perfect point where you get to, I made up a lot of dialogue, but a lot of the stuff in the book is real. But it gave me I had a lot of leeway since it wasn't a nonfiction book. But that's such a great question. I made Little Amy, who is myself, as authentic as I could, because I never thought about, and I'm sure some of it's fictionalized because I could not remember myself 100%, but I did it based on my perception of myself. And one of the biggest takeaways from doing that was I went from, at the beginning of writing the story, like I was cringing at her. When I first met her, the first half of the book, I was like, oh my God, this girl's got to get herself under control, because little Amy was not afraid to be herself. And then I realized, oh my God, I've lived so much of that away. And I finished the book and I was like, oh my God, I want to be her. And I want to spend the rest of my life kind of honoring her. And I think that was part of the emotional healing that I had like I was not trying to manufacture at all, like 1,000% no.
Well, what about your family? So how true to life were the family members you wrote into the book?
Right. I wrote, my family members were based on my perception of them.
Mm.
So I would say that was the real them. Now they could say and have said, and this has been a delightful, for the most part, journey for the people in the book. And they were like, just do what you want to do. My dad primarily said, don't ask us permission, just do it. But that's another learning lesson, is those characters are written, those are my perceptions of those people, and my perceptions of those people in today's time, and my perception of those people in 1978. So basically, as someone, and this is the way it works in history, the person writing has all the power. And that's what I have. And I really struggle because it was a delicate balance. You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, as in a memoir. It's a delicate balance.
Right, right. So what was your family's reaction then after they read it? And were there disagreements about, say, the way somebody would have acted, or what somebody would have said, or how they felt they really were as compared to how you felt they were?
Right. And I would have to answer that question in two parts, because my brother and sister, and it helps that the book is funny. It's humorous. So that takes a lot away. My brother and sister thought it was the greatest thing they'd ever read, because it took all these little memories, like us doing the gong show upstairs with the tambourines. All the stuff we did, they thought it was, hilarious. And they thought it was just such a tribute to our childhood. But even they were like, I was always the one who remembered everything in my mind the best. So I had all those little specific memories. And I think that's why I was probably a writer all along, whether I knew it or not. So they were like, oh, Amy and her memories, but it was never, nothing nefarious, nothing where they felt offended. At least they didn't tell me that. But then my parents, it wasn't different, but my mom and I had a difficult relationship. So that was more complicated, but she showed nothing but grace. And I tried to walk that tightrope of being fair, because I knew now as a mom that, I was seeing it all from one side. That was one of the things that was hard to navigate in writing the book, and then also in sharing the book with the world. My dad was easier, because my dad and I had a very easy relationship, but they both celebrated it. And my mom showed up to every single book thing. And I really think Stacy, that the book, again, totally non-intentionally, my mom and I's relationship is different because of it. Because I think those things that I never said growing up, we actually had a conversation after the fact, which is the epilogue of the book, talking about those things. And no, she did not agree with everything in the book. And she said that, but we didn't do it in like 2 hours. We did it in like 15 minutes. And then she really loved themes like, she was living the dream, but was she really in 1978? Is this really what she wanted? This guy and these three kids and this locked life that I don't have to live and you don't have to live. And she loved all that. And she just chose to focus on the positive, even though we did have the real conversation about what she did and didn't agree with about my childhood memories.
Interesting. Interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about your takeaways from the book and how it changed you. Because you mentioned you really liked your 10-year-old self and realized that you had lost some of her joie de vivre, let's say.
Right. I like that. She had lots of joie de vivre. Yeah.
So how do you feel that it changed you? Because you said it started out being just this funny little book that you were going to write, turned into something, and it probably is that for readers, but for you, it's now something very different for you, for your family, for your relationships with your siblings and your parents. Are you happy that you did that? Are the changes good changes? Were there any things any point where you wished, oh, I wish I had not done this?
Right. I think overall, I mean, there's little points. I think anytime you write something and you're an author, there's always going to be, you reread it and you're like, oh, are you kidding me? Even a sentence or a word, and a certain, there's certain scenes I would take out if I could do it again just now in retrospect. But my overall takeaway from the whole thing is very positive. And I think the overall takeaway, just for me personally, and I'm not speaking for any readers, is that I think it allowed me to let so many people off the hook. I let my mother off the hook because she was doing the best she could. I let my father off the hook because he was a male in the 1970s and grew up in a world that's not his fault. I let my older sister, who I've been jealous of my whole life, off the hook. And I think most importantly, I left myself off the hook. I was like, she just did the best she could, and like I said, now I want to, I think about her sometimes as a separate person. And I think that's what people like about the book, was I think they got that a little piece of that for themselves, and so I'm very proud of that. But I think the overwhelmingly takeaway for me is I let everyone off the hook, and I hope my kids will let me off the hook, and my husband, 100%.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think this is an exercise that people should do? This idea of revisiting themselves at a certain point in life, maybe at a certain point where they felt a particular challenge or whatever. For you, it seems to have had a positive effect on you going forward. So is it something you'd recommend? Maybe writing about it, even if they wrote about it fictionally, made up the characters, but put them in the same situation?
Oh, I think absolutely, done in the context of how someone would want to do it. I think it is, and I never anticipated this, it is a little bit of blueprint for, revisiting your younger self in some context, and the value of that. And there's also a lot of nostalgia and fun in it too, as well. So there is that emotional core. But I'm saying for anyone looking back, they're going to look back and they're going to enjoy those things that they forgot. So I do think it's a worthwhile exercise in the context of someone's own experience. And I'm not a psychoanalyst or a psychiatrist. I think it would have to be done in the context of where someone felt safe doing it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the nostalgia part of this. 1978. I'm curious how much time you had to spend researching that, how much you remembered accurately, or were there things where you're like, I swear it was this, and it turns out, nope, that wasn't the thing then.
Right. And that's a great question, because I immediately, the first thing I did was like, I remembered the things I remembered, like the toys we played with, the way the house looked, the colors and all those things. And that was easy. But then I spent a lot of time researching 1978. And that was my favorite part, other than the funny stuff of writing the book, was like I said at the beginning, I love that. So I was all up in the Sears catalogs. I spent a week at the Houston Library looking at the newspapers, the magazines, like everything I could get my hands on. So on one hand, there were the things I remembered as a kid that were absolutely true. Those things, the physical things that we did. It was such a delight to remember those. But then, as far as news and things that were going on in the wider world, well, of course, I was 10, so I didn't get. Like I had lived through this extraordinary period. I came across, and this is actually in the book. There was so much stuff I cut out of the book because there was so much of it because I had such a good time doing it. But I was watching like trailers for movies, and I looked at TV guides for that day of 1978, and there was this movie advertised about this couple who had both there's these two women who have both been married, then they were divorced from their husbands, they had children, but in fact they were in a lesbian relationship. And this was an ABC movie of the week, and there was a custody battle over this woman's children because she was a lesbian. I kept thinking this could not have been on TV in 1978. You know what? I was 100% wrong. That there, and then I came across there was I grew up in Texas, and the state next to us is Louisiana, and there was this article about how there was this Louisiana head and master law, and that women in Louisiana in 1978 couldn't own property in their own singular name, and the Supreme Court had turned down a bid to fight against this. And I was like, Stacy, I told myself, like, I lived in this time where women experienced this. And so those things were, that's life changing for someone who likes history and, current events that I had lived through. I was a part of this without knowing it.
Right, right. Learning what you learned about the time period and the things that were going on, did it make you appreciate what your parents were going through and what the, or let's say, more senior members of your family were going through at the time, the pressures that they were feeling?
Oh, absolutely. And I looked at my grandparents differently. And that's one of the sweetest scenes in the book. I see my deceased grandparents. They come and join us for Thanksgiving. And that's so relatable to anyone, who's
Yeah.
at a certain age. But oh yeah, and I looked at my mother primarily, and this is where my mother becomes a rock star. And she sees that in the book, though. I'm like, my mom, look at what my mom had to face that I had no idea, number one, and no appreciation for, and she lived through this time, and look at her now. She's not only survived it, now she's thriving at 85 years old. So yeah, absolutely. I looked at each of those, especially the senior members of my family, my parents and upwards, as someone who really, did groundbreaking things for me, which I guess
Yeah.
I knew that, but knowing the details enhanced it.
Yeah. What was it about that time period that you think gives it that texture that makes it so unique as compared to, I don't know, say the 60s or the 80s, or because you mentioned like this year's catalogs and things like that. What was it that you came across and you're like, this has to go in because this defined the time?
Right. I think we were in the 70s is very under celebrated. So that's one thing I'm proud about the book, because I don't think there's a lot of, there was the 70s show, but the late 70s, we were just about to go to Falcon Crest. We're about to get to the 80s, when everybody got their shoulder pads on. We were
Right.
kind of getting out of the polyester, but it was this jump off point to change. We were at the end of, these 60s and 70s, the turbulent 60s, and the 70s were still turbulent. You had Nixon out, you had Ford in, you had Carter at the end. It was before the whole Reagan thing kicked off, before, that period of time, which seems more stable, in retrospect, but maybe it wasn't, and I think we were on the cusp of something right there at the end of the 70s. We were at the end of stuff like that Louisiana head master law. Those things were ending. So we were about to take a right turn in another direction, but no one talks about those people at the crossroads of those two things, because you can't do that till later. And I think that's who the people of the late 70s are, and I think that, again, I'm proud to have represented that, but I also think it's something that's under, appreciated or studied or celebrated, but it will be as the future rolls on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one other thing I want to talk about regarding this book is writing humor, because it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy thing to get right. So I'm curious if you can talk about your experience, because there's writing humor for the sake of just writing humor and making things funny and conveying things in a funny manner. But there's also the idea of using humor to diffuse tension or sadness or to help strike a balance, to help get readers through something that's difficult. So, do you approach those kind of two ideas of humor differently, or do you just tackle it in your own special way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm a naturally funny person, but the reason I'm a naturally funny person is because it is a technique I think I was born with, like a gift to and I think a lot of people who are funny are this way. It's a survival technique. You use it to do just what you said. You use it to diffuse situations, to to turn people's attention to something else when you feel vulnerable. And then there's the other side of it, and this fits into well what you said. There's a joy for me in making people laugh. Like that's one of the top things I get to do in my life is watch people crack up at my shenanigans. And I think this book and this story is an absolute reflection on the two-prong approach to humor that you presented. In one hand, it's just funny because it is, and in one hand, the inner monologue in the book is funny because it's just funny, but the other thing, and the thing I think I'm number one proudest about in the book is there'll be a really serious comment, like some observation about life, and then it's like from the other side, zang, comes this ridiculous thing, and I think that's real life, and I think it represents our real life, whether we're humorous or not. I think we all use that, but some of it's inside. I get to use it outside, and people
Right.
probably wish I would stop, but I'm not going to.
Was that your role in the family? Was to kind of use humor to diffuse things, or did that role belong to someone else?
No, I think that was me, but I think
Yeah.
the way it began was I was just the bizarre kid who was doing her own thing. Like I don't even know what she was doing, but I think she was funny, and I think everybody thought she was funny, and I don't think I really appreciated that till I wrote the book. I think everybody thought she was, entertaining, and but she was just bizarre, and she was herself, and I think that she was funny, and and I've never even said this or thought this before, but I love how my adult humor weaves into her bizarreness in the story. And I never really thought about that. It's like two layers of us, you know, going at it at the same time. And what a absolute profoundly, exceptionally moving thing for me.
Yeah. Did you find yourself like approaching these situations that you were going to write about? Did you find yourself one thinking about how you would now react to something and then how your 10-year-old self would react? Were they generally in alignment, the two
Well,
reactions?
yeah, yeah, to a certain degree, but she was so oblivious because she should have been.
Mm,
She was delusional, and I see that in my own adult self. But she was like, "Oh, I'm everyone's favorite." I'm like, "Oh my God, you've lost your mind. These people, And I think but that's another thing that I found admirable about her. I'm like, she's not worried about all that.
right.
She's just gonna collect her baseball cards and move on to the next thing, And I think there was something, again, I mean, it was admirable. And
Yeah.
I think but I think that's very relatable. I think you can look back at younger Stacy and find things that you forgot that you were like, wait a second, we were once this. And one big takeaway like was the whole jealousy with my sister. And at one point, everyone's going around saying what they're thankful for. And I talk about how thankful I am for my sister's science fair trophy. And I looked at my younger self and I was like, wait a second, everybody's talking about her, not you, and you're going to celebrate her. And I'm like, wait, she's better than us. I'm better than this. Like I can do better. I can do better than just be jealous of everyone and worry that everybody's proud of her science fair project, doesn't care about my soccer goal thing.
Well, I want to talk a little bit. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about your other book, Dear Dana, because you have two books out. But let's talk about Dear Dana for a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Right. And that's a story that happened to me as opposed to, it's chronicling an event in my life as opposed to making up a whole other story about my time travel. But basically, and it's hard to elevator pitch, but I was on Facebook one day. I friended a girl who I'd known at a summer camp 35 years ago. And I scrolled through her profile like we do. We'd had zero contact in all that time. We were both loud and thought we were funny. So we had connected. And I realized she has 5 kids, the youngest of which is her only son. He has cancer. He's at St. Jude in Memphis. So I start following along the story. He goes in remission. He relapses. And I'm as a mom, as a human being, I'm like, I got to do something. So I sit down at my desk the Monday morning after I find out, and it's like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. I'm like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna start sending them supportive cards to the Ronald McDonald House in Memphis, Tennessee. But I hadn't written anyone a letter in 30 years. I hadn't spoken to her, had any contact. I didn't hit like or comment on any of her stuff because I felt like that was disingenuous because she's fighting for this kid's life. And so I start writing them together, and and I'm half thinking this is nuts. They don't even know who you are, but I write them for probably 15 weeks. And then the kid passes away from cancer
Oh.
at 15 years old. I'm like, so what do I do? And I'm like, well, I'll send a condolence card. And then I'm like, I should be doing something. So I just kept sending her letters, but now I had to like stalk her husband and figure out he was an attorney, and I started sending the letters there. So this is like different levels of me being crazy, the story is. So I keep writing her, and the whole time I'm thinking, this is ridiculous, because it was. And then lo and behold, about 5 months in, she writes me back. She writes me this 10-page letter and talks about her grief. And at the end, she says, I didn't know I was going to say anything about any of that. I just knew I was supposed to write you back, but I feel better for writing it. So me and this woman spent 2 years in like 2017 writing back and forth in the US mail, and no contact other than no texting, no emailing, no messaging, none of that. And it creates this incredible vacuum where we can share whatever we want to. We end up trusting each other. I'm looking at my life from the outside in. So is she. And I sit back after about 8 months of this, and I'm like, if all this goodness can come from this one random girl from Facebook, what about all these other people? So I went all world bananagrams, and I decided I'm going to write all my Facebook friends a handwritten letter. And I thought, Stacy, I'd get to like letter 30, but I got to letter 30 and I was like, this may be the most important thing I ever do in my life, because I didn't realize what a letter in 2020 was going to mean to somebody, that you had taken that time and effort. I didn't understand that when I connected with people who didn't believe the things I did, that I was going to stop caring about what they believed, because it was an act in human connection. And I started to realize why I was connected to these people, and that they were all actually rock stars. So 18 months later, I wrote 600 handwritten letters. I wrote a book about it. I run around and talk about it all over the place. I speak about it. And really, it's become kind of my life's mission, this handwritten letter note thing. And that's what the second book's about.
So what was the result of the 600 letters written and sent?
Well, the result was it just blew up my life, because I realized I had so many takeaways, and I didn't do any of that thinking I was going to write a book about it. I just knew once I had the experience, there was so much hope in it. There was so much hope in human connection, and especially in the divisive culture we live in, that I wanted to share that when one person reaches out to another in a very intentional way, like a letter or a handwritten note, and the other person responds in kind, that it doesn't matter anymore. It still matters how you voted, but it doesn't matter in light of the connection, that we can be connected to people and we can care about them, and even love them regardless of how we stand on any issue. And that was the lesson over and over again, that and the tactile power of a handwritten note. People have this magical moment of a mailbox. Like let's say we went to high school together, you and I, and you sent me like a nice note with like 6 lines in it and just said you were thinking about me and you remembered me from the lunchroom and thanked me for something I did when your grandmother died. Well, first of all, I'm going to get to my mailbox and I'm going to hold that in my hand, and I'm going to immediately understand. And I experienced this hundreds of times. Stacy had to sit down. She had to find a pen. Where's the paper? Oh my God, she needs an envelope. Where are the stamps? Wait, she doesn't have my address. Then she had to drive across town and stick it in a mailbox. So I'm going to hold this in my hand, me of social media, me of the instantaneous communication world. And I'm going to be like, holy Toledo, this is how much I matter to another human being. And over again, people were like, oh my God, that letter made my life. And the number one response I got was, I'm going to save your letter in a special place for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And I realized that we all have this. You don't have to be a writer, and you don't have to write a letter. It can be 4 lines. We all have this tool in our little human toolkits, and it literally has the power to change what we're experiencing as a culture.
Yeah. Yeah. So the response you got back, I assume, was positive, but I imagine it was like across the board too. People writing back humorous things, people writing back very heartfelt things. Did it keep up? Did you find that they were then reaching out? I mean, and I assume it has also changed the way you relate to people going forward.
Oh, absolutely. Because, and this sounds very obvious, but, people wrote me things that were not, you couldn't see the depth of their lives on Facebook. That's obvious, but it was mind blowing when you experience that 600 times. And people felt so touched by the letters that they felt, like you said, some of the responses were humorous. Some of the responses were like a letter you would have gotten in high school, like 6 pages in 4 different colors about your update. They updating you on their life,
Uh-huh.
delightful. And then some people felt so seen and heard and valued that they shared very personal things with me, and because they needed that, it was like an anchor. They wanted to hang on to something. And I walked away feeling a little bit guilty because you can't keep 600 doors open like that. You just can't. The act of the letter still mattered, but it absolutely changes the way I look at everybody, because I realize everyone is a rock star.
Right.
Everyone has a story that is real as mine. Everyone has an experiences that are as real as mine, and as wonderful and jubilant and horrible and like all screwed up as my life feels like, so does theirs. So looking around the room, I look at everyone differently now, and I feel like those relationships, because the whole time I'm like everybody else thinking I'm going to get off Facebook after this. I can't, because I'm connected to these people for a real reason. And Facebook is nothing more than a jump off point to real relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Something to keep in mind.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got these books, and they're both of them are about you. They're very personal. Is that a theme that you're going to continue? And I assume maybe you have more books in you, more books that you would like to write. Are they of the same ilk? I mean, are they going to be about you in some way, shape, or form, or do you have ideas for books in other genres or other audiences, or
Yeah, and I
what's?
think my next book won't be as personal.
Hmm,
I think that I don't know what's left to reveal. I mean, like everyone who writes, including you, like whatever I'm working on something now, whatever that character is going to have me in it,
right.
but it's not going to be directly me. It's not going to be, that's me. It's going to be someone else. What I'm working on is a humorous historical fiction book. So that's what I'd like to write next, where I'd like to include the humor, and probably, and what I've realized is I think what I'm not what I'm good at, but I think what I feel like I'm meant to write is like humor with with some kind of weight to it, something where there's something to think about or be learned with a humorous twist to it.
Mm.
But, and I think that reflects again back to my personality. So I think that's probably the best way forward for me based on what I've learned about myself as a writer up to this point.
Interesting. Okay. Well, sounds good. Well, Amy, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with You Cannot Mess This Up and Dear Dana, and Works in Progress. We will keep our fingers crossed for those going forward. So, congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far. Actually, I want to ask, I'm sorry. I want to ask if people want to learn more about you and the books and things that you have going on, where can they go to find you?
Right. The best place is my website, which is amydaughters.com. But that has the books, the speaking, all the story, anything you might want to know. Plus, links to contact me, plus my physical mailing address, because I'm a proponent of, again, the U.S. Postal Service.
Write you a letter. Yes.
Right. I'll write you
Okay.
back.
Well, and if people want to purchase a copy of either book, You Cannot Mess This Up or Dear Dana, where can they go to buy it?
Right. It's available, both are available wherever fine books are sold. But I like the bookshop.org app, because that, if you don't have a local bookstore, I mean, the best thing would be to go in your local bookstore and ask for it, and then they'll order it for you. But, bookshop.org, if you go on there, it supports independent bookstores. You may pay $1 more than Amazon, which they're available there too, which is great. But that's such a great thing to support, because the dying bookstore gets supported by the bookshop people.
Right, right. Yes, very true. Well, congratulations, Amy, on everything you've accomplished so far. And I want to wish you the best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. It's been a real delight. I've loved your questions, and it's an honor to be on this podcast, because I know it's long running, and you've talked to a lot of authors. So I really do feel privileged to be able to talk to you, Stacy. Thank you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.